If When How, the Prison Legal Education Project, and the Criminal Record Expungement Project, thank you for joining us today for our panel on criminalizing reproductive decision-making. We'd also like to thank the Toll Public Interest Center and the Law School generally for supporting this event. As you may or may not know, this event is part of the Penn Law Public Interest Week, where the area of focus this year is unsettled, shifting areas of the law. This panel is intended to highlight the unsettled area of law that is reproductive justice and rights. What is reproductive justice? Oh, sorry. Sister Song, a woman of color-led reproductive justice organization based in the South, defines reproductive justice as the human right to maintain personal bodily autonomy, have children, not have children, and parent the children we have in safe and sustainable communities. Reproductive justice has long been fought for by Indigenous women, Black women, and other women of color, but as a term was coined in 1994. Importantly, reproductive justice is not reproductive rights. It's much more expansive, as the definition suggests. The Dobbs decision forced many of us who view reproductive rights as fundamental rights to reflect on the way that we cannot rely on the courts and those in power to ensure we're able to make decisions about if, when, and how to have children. I lost my place doing that. Okay. While Dobbs opened the door for increased criminalization of abortion, we decided that this discussion today should not be centered around Dobbs. Instead, we wanted to give space to the other types of reproductive decision-making that are criminalized, such as sex, pregnancy, birth, and parenting generally. We ask that you please write down any and all questions for our panelists and moderator, and we will have 15 minutes at the end to ask questions. Your index cards, just like pass them to the side, you know what to do. So before I pass it off to Professor Kara McClellan, who's our moderator, I just wanted to provide a warning that we'll be talking about heavy things, including sexual violence. So we want everyone to take care of themselves by taking a break or leaving if necessary. Professor Kara McClellan is a new professor at Penn Law. She is the professor of the Penn Law Advocacy for Racial and Civil Justice Clinic. She was previously assistant counsel at the NAACP Legal Defense and Education Fund, focusing on increasing education equity and ending the criminalization of Black people. We're beyond honored that she is moderating this conversation today. She will let each panelist introduce themselves momentarily. Take it away, Kara.
Well, thank you all so much. It's really an honor to be here with such an esteemed panel. And also it's wonderful to see so many students and future advocates in the room who are interested in engaging in conversations around reproductive justice, especially from a racial justice lens. So we want to dive in, and we have a great group of panelists and experts, and wanting to start by asking you all if you could talk a little bit about your why. How do you come to the work? Why did you decide to spend your time and energy focused on addressing the criminalization of reproductive justice? Marty, we'll start with you.
So I came to this place all through law, and that was that I started doing law work first in a special education lawyer background, making sure that schools were providing the right things under the federal law for children who had special needs. And one of our clients was arrested, and I attended delinquency court with my supervisor at the time. I don't think I was even a certified law intern yet. And he was arrested for arson, but he was a diagnosed pyromaniac and had been for the last 15 years. And so our argument was that just like in school when they were going to suspend him for this issue, for lighting his cafeteria table on fire while his one-to-one went out for a cigarette, we argued that this should be a manifestation of his disability. And the criminal court said, we don't care. We don't care if he's disabled. Tons of disabled people do this work. Tons of people with educational exceptionalities do actions like this, and we prosecute them all the time. This is how we do it. And so I decided to go instead into criminal defense. And so I went to the Defender Association. I was there for 6.5 years. I got recruited by a big law firm. I made it 6 months before I put in my notice. I stayed and negotiated an end-of-the-year bonus. And with that end-of-the-year bonus, I opened my own law firm in 2012. December 17th, it will be 10 years, and I just hired a new associate. And some of you might know I don't know if it goes around the law schools, but in October of 2020, during a homicide preliminary hearing that was high profile, my water broke in the courtroom, and I had a baby that day instead of my hearing. I went back to work 2 weeks later. That's what the continuance was for the judge to give me so I could come back for argument in a homicide where a police officer was killed. The rest of my year was thinking about reproductive rights and kind of dealing with what really having autonomy as a parent means, especially when you don't have the protections of the law, because I'm my own boss and no one really cares if I have maternity leave. And so some of the things that I found in the criminal justice system were wonderful support from judges and from court staff, really great. But had I not been a lawyer that was prepared in their courtroom every single day and always on time for the 20 years before that, I don't know that I would have gotten to raise my son or start raising my son the way that I did. So that is my personal interest and then also my kind of professional interest. And I'll talk about some other cases later. Thank you.
Hello. Hi, everyone. My name is Cynthia Alvarado, and it's an honor to be here. Thank you so much for having me. What brings me here today was, unfortunately, in 2008, I was arrested for a crime that was committed by a male. In 2010, I was convicted and sentenced to life without parole. As I awaited my trial, I was unfortunately brutally raped by a guard. In the process of dealing with custody issues of my children, I was placed in solitary confinement where I started to hear voices on ending my life. I won my federal habeas petition after 11 long years, and it took them about 8 months to release me. I'm here today on the behalf of the women that I left behind. More importantly, I'm here to end the shenanigans of how we treat women, right, in the carceral states, but to bring those women home and to stop the women from being raped while they're in prison, because it's disgusting. With that being said, I'm going to pass it on here to my blonde sister.
Thank you so much. And I come at this from a perspective of family court, which is a slightly different lens, but an equally important one, as I think everyone on the panel would agree. I started thinking that I was going to do civil rights work and policy work, and then I was able to represent my first client. And that's when I decided that was where my dedication lay and how I wanted to practice. And I walked into family court, and 25 years later have not left, whether it was in New York City or Philadelphia, because of the profound injustice and all of the mothers that have been left behind without their children in that courthouse. So when I started, I worked at an organization that was primarily a public defender organization, and was starting to see the overlap between the carceral criminal justice system and the family policing system, which was at that time known as the child welfare or child protection system. And in that work, I was able to see really the depth of injustice with particularly Black and brown families in the Bronx, where I practiced, being separated for little to no cause because they were poor, because they had a minor criminal arrest or a minor criminal conviction, being separated not simply for weeks or months, but for years, and then ultimately forever. So that work has sort of kept up in what I do today as part of the Interdisciplinary Child Advocacy Clinic here at Penn, and I'm just thrilled to talk to you and thrilled to sit next to my sister over here.
Thank you each for that. And we just want to say again, the issues we're talking about are political, but they're also personal, and they impact all of us in different ways. And if you need to take a moment to take a break at any point and rejoin us and come back, please do. We know this is personal for many of us in the room. And indeed, first of all, I should say thank you, Cynthia, for sharing and for speaking truth to power in so many ways. We just really want to acknowledge that. And I'll say, Marty, also, I know that you and I work on a case together that's been going on for over 3 years, and I saw you go from Zooms, where you were pregnant, to Zooms with, yeah, exactly, backgrounds. So all of us are impacted in personal ways for all of these issues. But Marty, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more. You have represented people who are criminalized as parents. And so how have you navigated those cases? And also if you could talk more about who is impacted.
Sure. So the criminalization of parents is really broad. So I wanted to kind of bring to the table some of the things, the ways that I thought about it, that popped into my head from my experience. And I don't know, I actually don't know how much it's been studied, because I did try to find some categories for you guys that have been, where statistics have been calculated and brought to you, and it was really hard to do. So I just want to point out some of the ways. We've had cases recently in Pennsylvania and Philadelphia, specifically around stealing of public education. People using addresses in different counties, because we talk about a free and public education, but it's not free. It's depending on what state you're in, it's from your property taxes most likely. And so you are paying directly into the school, and you are stealing if you decide to send your child to another school, even if it's still in the great old Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And so using different addresses has become something where they charge the parents with theft of services on occasion, often ask for jail time, or the lovely way of doing it is giving someone probation as though it is a gift and getting ready to violate their probation when they can't afford to pay restitution. And this can be in the tens of thousands, and there might be certain ways you can look at it. I will tell you right now that there are people who change their address to Philadelphia and send their brilliant kids to Masterman and are desperate to get their kids into a better place. So I want you to know that it's in and out of Philadelphia. It's all different types of demographics in regards to that area. This might be more obvious because there are rules on the books about hitting anyway. But there's the aspect of the aspect of physical abuse is obviously one, and corporal punishment. You can imagine that changes very much from demographic to demographic, because it's also a cultural thing, and there's a lot of issues with people who are from other countries, but also impacts Black and brown people the most. You would be surprised how many judges don't know what a switch is, but is willing to send a Black person to jail for using one on their child without blinking an eye, and wondering why that culture has permeated over a course of time. By the way, it's a branch that you use to hit your kid. Okay. There is obviously truancy. In some states, there is siding with your trans child and supporting them in their gender identity. We criminalize migrant parents all of the time for either bringing their children or sometimes not taking their children to certain places when they're in this country, leaving them with certain family members the state decides is unfit when you're entering a detention center, for instance. Seeking or not seeking medical care is a very big one, especially in Pennsylvania, where we have people who, different religions and different sects in Pennsylvania do religious healing or spiritual healing instead of a more traditional healthcare system. There are people who fail to protect their children from their abuser. We also have zero tolerance in schools, and we're starting more and more to criminalize parents who are unable to control their children while they are in school, or don't pick their children up when they are called from the school. We have tons of cases of people who are criminalized and have their kids taken away immediately from taking drugs while they are pregnant. And they are considering, in some states, prosecuting childhood obesity and circumcision. I have no idea whether they're going to think about circumcision with a religious waiver or not. And then certainly they've decided to prosecute parents when children are committing delinquent acts. And you're going to see that in Philadelphia in the news right now, because the ages where people are getting arrested for shootings and murders and attempt murders is getting lower and lower in our city, and people love to comment on social media about where are the parents and why aren't the parents now going to be in jail without knowing anything about the case at all. So personally, I can say that I have a really big problem with a more laws approach to these things. I noticed that we love to make things illegal in a new way, despite the fact that we have ridiculous laws on the books that we never bother to review ever. So it's illegal for me to punch someone in the face. It's still illegal for me to punch my child in the face. It's illegal for me to punch you in the face, I mean, unless you're consenting. And so to have new laws on the books is a direct threat to parents, to the way that they raise their child, and to criminalizing that behavior. Now, does that mean that I think people should punch each other in the face? No. And it doesn't mean that I think kids should get punched in the face by their parents. What it means is that these people are going to be punished longer and harder and exposed to more and more risk of jail time with every charge that goes onto a record. in this country, in this state, have recently, and I don't even know if everyone knows this, but we've recently criminalized strangulation. Now, do you think that it was okay to choke and strangle someone before they put strangulation as a special charge on the books in Pennsylvania? Does anyone want to raise their hand if they thought it was okay for me to strangle someone? Okay. We also have a really new fun law that has a mandatory minimum for the possibility that you may have shot at a police officer, and it doesn't seem to have a really great aspect for whether that was intentional or reckless. And so now, while you couldn't shoot at a cop before, you now really, really, really can. Okay, with no consideration of the facts and circumstances. So these are really laws that are often feel good for the legislature to pass and then champion the fact that they passed this law. But I would ask people to think about, when we look at the criminalization of parents, think about whether this law needed to be made, whether it hurts someone who deserves that extra hurt, because don't forget, it's already illegal. They're already going to come see us. And whether this is really a hole in the enforcement provisions in a certain act, or whether this is necessary to make people better parents, okay? Because we often think about the punishment side of things, fine. Like I said, I don't want any kids punched in the face. But what we need to think about is whether they're going to become better parents from all of these new laws, or whether more kids are going to suffer. Obviously, we often, in the laws that I talk about, we often criminalize reckless behavior. And when I think of the word reckless, I mean, it varies statute to statute. Trust me, I do all my research before I defend someone. But what I want you to think of it as is very broadly, that you knew or should have known. How patronizing is the words "you should have known better" in the context of criminalizing a parent? We don't know what we're doing when the kid comes out. It's that hard. I'll admit that. It is, and I don't care if it's like your 10th kid. It is a difficult situation every single time to deal with a human being that is unable to talk to you and tell you what they want. But anyway, we say that they should have known, that you should have known better in all of these instances when we talk of reckless behavior. And the way that is infantilizing, patronizing, is disturbing when we're talking about parenting. I just want to point out also, to kind of contextualize some of what we talk about, is in the criminal justice system, we rely on DHS to investigate all these cases. Half of my discovery in a criminal case is reports from DHS workers. DHS is fabulous. DHS does nothing wrong if we're reading their report into the record in a criminal case and we want to use it to lock someone up. But we don't ever trust DHS to just help a parent out and program for them so that we can give them back their kid, right? So the DA's office will suck up your investigation, use it against you from those DHS workers, and then argue that DHS doesn't do a good enough job, so we have to incarcerate this person. That's the argument that and I'm not, it was for Lynn Abraham, it was for Seth Williams, it's for Larry Krasner. We're not doing that today, okay? That's what goes on. When we do let DHS program, and DHS helps a parent significantly, and that parent is able to get their child back, their jury trial on whatever happened could be happening a year and a half later, and now they're being criminalized and taken from that child again. And in some of the cases that I might talk about later, that's exactly what happens, is my client is at home with her children, everything's now been fine for over a year, and now they're going to jail on whatever the charge was. So those are the kind of items that I wish for you guys to think about, that I hope that my experience can give you some more insight into.
Thank you so much for really laying all of that out and really describing the ways that the system of family regulation have been ever expanding at the same time that the social safety net has not, so that often what we're talking about is really criminalizing poverty. And Professor Fink, I think this is a great time to bring you in, because you represent young people, and in some cases mothers, who are impacted by family policing. So what do you see as some of the parallels between child policing and carceral policing?
Sure, and I have so much to say. Even so just hard. So hard. What Marty just said, I could spend an hour. We could have this conversation for all afternoon. But I want to sort of pick up on a couple of points that were raised, which is to point out, of course, in the family court system, you don't have the same procedural due process protections that you have in the criminal court system. So in an interesting way, I would often be like, it would be so nice to be in criminal court, right? Because then there's one incident, there's a jury, and that's it. You can't go against my client and say, well, what did they do 4 months into the time when their child was removed? And they missed a parenting class that was for infants when my client's child is a teenager. So why are they doing that? Or they didn't do their anger management, or they seemed too angry because they yelled at the caseworker. Why do you think they yelled at the caseworker? Because the caseworker took their child. So that seems like a pretty legitimate response. Or they showed no response at all, and so they mustn't love their child, as opposed to that is a response to the trauma that that parent underwent, which led to this in the first place.
And their criminal defense attorney might have said, keep it low key while you guys are talking about that, because I don't want a statement to be used against you. All on me.
Correct. Correct. So when you think about the family court system and you think about child protection system, right, what most of you, if you haven't stepped foot into a family court in this country, may think is, we're protecting children. We're keeping them safe. So here's what you need to know. The vast majority of cases nationally involve neglect. And as Professor McClellan stated, that's a proxy for poverty. That's talking about educational neglect, medical neglect, lack of access to health care, lack of access to behavioral health services if your child has a mental health need that hasn't been met, inadequate housing, which means you might have a bad landlord who won't fix the repairs and won't make them, so will remove your child, substance abuse and lack of access to actual treatment programs, failure to supervise, and lack of access to childcare. So the majority of cases that you think this system represents of severe physical, sexual, and emotional abuse, which do happen, are not what are driving the system. What is driving the system is neglect. So anywhere from 75 to 88%, depending on which federal study you look at. And that has remained constant for the past 3 decades. No matter what federal law has been passed, what initiative a big family foundation has put millions of dollars in to remedy the system, that has remained constant. We punish and we police families of color because they are poor. Additionally, let's look at the outside. So we might say, okay, but we're willing to accept that, right? As a country, we'll accept that law, we'll accept that system, if we are doing better for the children who are in the system. I work primarily with children in the clinic who are adolescents, some of whom, as was said, are parents themselves, others of whom are between the ages of sort of 14 and 21, which in Philadelphia and Pennsylvania, you can stay in foster care until you turn 21. So let's look at the outcomes nationally for adolescents who have been through the system. On every single metric of well-being or stability that you would judge that parent for, the system is failing. If you age out of the system, you are more likely to be incarcerated if you are a male, to be pregnant at an earlier age if you are a female, to be unemployed or underemployed, to be homeless, to not graduate from high school. If you do graduate from high school, you are more likely not to be able to continue and follow through on postgraduate education. And so on every educational, financial, and housing stability metric that you would judge a family on of being, quote, a good parent, the system is failing the young people before them. So in looking at it that way, what you start to see is that we're not actually effectuating a child welfare or well-being system. And in many cases, you will find examples where we're not effectuating a child protection system. So I think the other important thing to realize is that this is sort of the lowest of the lowest courts. When you think about who is doing this type of work and how young this court is it a relatively really, really young court that has only been in, since the 1970s when kids were given lawyers federally. And even now, the right to have an attorney in family court if you are a parent does not exist in every state. The quality of that representation has been shown to be really poor across the board. And so thinking about how these systems actually either protect and preserve and promote justice and family autonomy or act against it is what I would ask all of you to think about. And the sort of final thing I'll say is that I think often when we think about family court and child welfare, again, we sort of go, well, those are sort of family issues, right? And we're going to allow DHS to work it out. And I want to go back to a study that was done about a decade ago by an economist, of all people, from MIT, not usually their field. And I don't usually read articles by economists, I'll admit. And this was done, it was a fascinating study that looked at cases where children were returned to their parents within 30 to 60 days after they first went into court, versus those that were sort of equally situated on a case. The outcomes for the children who remained with their families were far better than even that short stay in care. And so when we think about all of the work that has been done in other fields, which is always where I go to when I'm thinking about how to improve the system and how to improve justice for families and for mothers in particular, what you see is that attachment is real, it's meaningful, it has huge consequences for child development and child well-being. And when we disrupt that for even the smallest amount of time, right, 30 days, it has a profound impact on a child's life.
So Cynthia, your advocacy is really so powerful in terms of advocating and shining a light on how women on the inside are impacted by issues of family policing and other sorts of regulation. So I'm wondering if you can talk to us a little bit about what do folks need to know about what it's actually like to be a mother on the inside, to give birth or to raising kids while in prison.
Yeah, so first I want to start off by saying that in order to address all of the issues that we're talking about, we have to be realistic with capitalism, right? A lot of our criminal courts, like Marnie was talking about, they don't want to take into consideration the socioeconomic class, the trauma of being poor, right? They don't want to identify with that because it's pushing the narrative of mass incarceration, and it's, putting fear into the public that these people are dangerous, when 99% of those people are there for economical or psychological. And then the 1% who is the most dangerous are there because of mental health issues that the DOC is not equipped to deal with, right? So we are destroying people. And in doing so, I could talk about my experience. I lost custody of both of my children as an innocent person, okay? Because I did not commit the crime, and I get emotional when I talk about that. I was convicted for a crime that was committed by a man, right? So all of my rights were violated under the felony murder law, which is completely unconstitutional because it violates our Constitution, period. However, I succumbed to that reality. What I learned was that when I went to court, right, I did a panel with Cornell and Harvard on, how to better train lawyers, women lawyers, to defend their clients, right? When I went to trial, like Marnie was talking about a year and a half before, the incident, I was in a traumatic car accident, and my uncle died, and I survived. I had to live with survivor's guilt of maybe not turning the wheel fast enough, right? Or maybe I could have done something to prevent his death. None of that was ever brought up in court. How I was, addicted to OxyContin because I broke my pelvis and I was almost paralyzed. I was judged for being a bad mother, for being on a drug corner, for self-medicating, right? And I grew up on a drug corner. So in addressing realities in courtrooms, right, they don't want to be realistic. They want to say she was a bad mother because she was on a drug corner. But they should have said she was born on a drug corner, right? So it's kind of rational for me to be in those areas. When I encountered, when I was convicted, of course, I lost everything. I lost my children. I was brutally raped, which induced a lot of mental health issues, and I have no healing for that. This man committed a crime against me when I was fighting for my life, when I was battling custody of my children, and I had zero help because of the statute of limitations on rape. Every door slammed in my face. But to elaborate on my comrades, I could tell you that when I went upstate, they were predominantly Black women. When I left, and I was about 12 years later, it was filling up with white women. But these were Black women that were poor. These were women, crack cocaine era, right? Many of them had issues. They started doing crack. They have not been with their children for 50 years, 40 years, 30 years. So just think about that for a moment, how ridiculous that is. And if you look at the lifer population, especially in Pennsylvania, right, where we have the majority of lifers, it's disgusting. They come from Philadelphia. There's about 230 female lifers. That's it in the state of Pennsylvania. And these women, I could tell you, are being forgotten by everybody because they don't have money for lawyers, right? They lose their kids, they lose their rights. So what happens? They have to go on every day and survive the abuse that's imposed on them by the guards, right? By the rapes, because many of my comrades were raped up there and have children. And that boy that was born by a lifer female and a lifer dad has never been in the room with his mom or his dad because he was never asked to be here, right? That's what the Department of Corrections is supposed to do, right? Correct. However, that seems a little contrary to correction, right? I can tell you that those women are suffering and they're dying and they're being neglected medical treatment. They're not, Larry Krasner has not let out one woman. I won my federal habeas petition thanks to Judge Leeson, so Philadelphia did me no favors. And I'm a big fan of his because, I respect civil rights. However, not one woman has been released. I have a problem with that. These are deserving lifers that have lost every opportunity to be with their children and their grandchildren. And seeing that, I just was like, I'm never going to get out of here. These women have 30, 40, 50 years, I'm going to die here. But seeing how sad they were is what kept me strong. I said I had to disassociate from what I have to feel, what may be my reality when I started to see many of them die. But it's terrible what they're going through. I could tell you that, PREA has just been enacted about, I would say 5 years ago, the Prison Rape Elimination Act, right? Before that, the male guards were touching us. They were allowed to feel us up and down. And if you reported them, you were going straight to the hole. That's how real it is. Our system in America is disgusting. And as an American, especially first generation, it's embarrassing to say that, right? Because we're supposed to be the best country in the world. However, we all know that's not the case, and I think that's why we're here. But the women are suffering, and they need our help to get them out. To get them out. These are women that are in their 70s, some of them in their 90s. They can't even walk to the bathroom alone. And these are the women that are still in state prisons, subjected to searches, subjected to everything that the men go through, these women go through as well. So my heart is with the women, and I hope that everybody here today remembers there's only like 230 lifers in PA. And where it was black and brown when I left, I could tell you that the white women lifer population is rising. So we need to be very afraid how the courts are throwing us away as women. And we need to know when we're in that courtroom, we're going to be judged by women jurors who think that we should have been home baking cookies, right? That you should have been stronger. Because as women, that's how they view us. You should be stronger. You should have known better. That's not the reality. We are humans. We suffer, and we suffer differently. And in courtrooms, we are criminalized for not being strong. With that being said, I hope I was able to shine some light. And I want to really thank Marnie, who I don't know, but I heard a lot about you. And I respect all of your work and all you beautiful ladies here.
Can I ask real quick? Has anyone been to Muncie?
No.
Anyone else? Does anyone know where Muncie is? Okay. How did you get home?
Yeah, let me explain. I want to answer.
Like the day you got out, how did you get home?
I'm happy that you asked me that, Marnie, because literally, like Chadaweo could tell you, there was 5 years I didn't see my kids. 5 years I couldn't see my kids because it was too far. And as the years went on, the burden on my family was stronger and stronger. And it would have to be either, should Bianca get shoes or should I get a visit? So the first, it was hard. The first 7 years I was getting visits. But it went a period of 5 years, and it's only almost 4 hours from Philly. It tells you the burden that it has on our families and how their grades go down when they don't understand why their mom, my daughter would be like, why don't you invite me there? Why can't I come see you? She didn't understand that. But how I got home was, thank the universe. I was transported out of that Muncie hellhole, which is literally it's surrounded by a rural community that hates us. They hate progressive people for no reason at all because maybe they're uneducated, and I have compassion for them too. But I was transported to RCF, Riverside Correctional Facility, and that's where I was raped. So just imagine how scared I was going back to that jail, knowing I was like, is he still gonna be there? What's gonna happen if I go there and he's there? But I was released from RCF. I know I should have been released from Muncie. They should have dropped the charges. Larry Krasner dropped the ball on my case. And even though, I side with him when I have to side with him because I'm a smart woman, they could do a better job, and they dropped the ball with my case big time. But that's why we're here today and we're fighting. And I believe, listen, no shots to the men. I love all you guys here. But the women, right now is our time to slay. And we need to separate our race and how they're trying to divide us with that Willie Lynch mentality. And we need to erase the class dynamic. And we need to look at each other like sisters. That once you enter that courtroom, let me tell you something right now, whether you're rich or not, they're going to judge you for whatever you did that day, and they're not going to care about what you were feeling, maybe if your mom died or you were raped a week before. So just know what you're dealing with, but we're going to kill this all together.
No, thank you, Cynthia, and also thank you, Marnie, for making sure that we address the issue of how families are separated. And, I think everything you said just goes to show how not only are prisons and jails not positioned to address trauma that's causing folks to be incarcerated, but also they're creating additional traumas, traumatizing in new ways, whether through sexual violence or separation of families. And so clearly this is not a solution. And I think you offer, a really hopeful potential way for us to build coalition in terms of thinking about all the ways that, right now people are impacted by Dobbs in terms of really having to grapple with the ways that women's rights are under attack. And so I guess I want to ask each of you more about how do we use this moment as an opportunity for coalition building, or
First, please.
Sure, please.
So I'm all about my sisters behind the wall, right? And then the males as well. But however, I could tell you right now, my good friend Caroline Turner, who will be judged, we're gonna make sure of that. The way that we fix this is, first of all, preventative measures, right? Because like Marnie said, she's dealing with a lot of cases already. But right now we have a perfect case. Caroline could elaborate later about children that are being accused of killing somebody who attacked them first, right? I think that we need to stand behind these kids, and we need to tell America, no more. You're not ripping no more families apart. These kids deserve to be held accountable for what minute thing that they did in defending themselves. But we need to say, instead of housing them in a place like jail, because they are in jail. I've been in jail with them. They walk the same lines that we walk, and they're isolated from everybody. And that to me is disgusting. So how do we fix that? Let's send them all to boarding schools. Let's let them stay in a boarding school for the 2 years that it takes to fight a homicide case. That's what we have to do. We have to use the cases right now to say, you know what, we're not going to let you send them to a jail. Let's send them to a boarding school. Let's make the phone calls. Let's stand behind these kids so that they are not destroyed. And they don't even want to leave jail. That's how bad their life was. So if we don't step up for those kids as preventative measures, right, this is how we make change, right? Because like Marnie knows as a lawyer, fighting cases, that's nonstop. But we're trying to make real changes in the world. And with those little kids that don't want to come home because their life is terrible, we need to tell them, baby, that's not normal that you want to stay there, first of all. We will put you in a boarding school where you can learn and be treated like a privileged kid, even though they're saying you did something bad. So I think in those ways, but we have to really get the life for women out. There's only 230 of them and they're dying. We need to get them out because they gave birth to all the men that are walking around here. And not doing that, we're forgetting about them. you know? So I hope that I was able to provide, but I think preventative measures with that case, all of us sticking behind those kids and getting the women out. And I'm always open to help for free. Anybody that needs help for the movement. So just to let you know, Marty.
And thank you also for reminding us about how Pennsylvania in particular has created the largest number of lifers in the country, I think second only to Louisiana, if I have that right. And one thing I learned recently is that the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania is struggling with what does it mean to create geriatric facilities for the number of people who are being held. Right, exactly, as if that's not a sign that that folks should be let out because we can't even provide age-appropriate services for the amount of people who are over age. But please, Professor Fink and Marnie, if you could talk a little bit about how Dobbs has impacted your advocacy.
Can I answer a different question first? Okay. Well, so I want to say, I think I appreciate that Cynthia will do this for free. She should be paid. And she should be at the decision-making table for every time there is any issue about criminal justice reform and prison reform.
That's how much I care. That's how much
I know.
That they mean so much, and those kids, like right now, that are in that little jail cell, like literally, I've been stressing about those kids because I used to be one of those kids where I didn't even want to be home because of the domestic violence, and I went to placement, and I felt like I was happy there, but that's not normal. It's not normal, and the reason I say for free is because that's how serious it is to me. Yeah, I should be paid, but the reality of the matter is, you know, a lot of this American system is built on money. So if I could help, and I could tell you, look, I'll provide any service to help these kids, or do any legwork that I have to do to bring these women home, that's where my heart is at, right? But thank you for not exploiting the returning citizens. Thank you.
Well, and I mean this seriously because, right, for far too long, the decision makers have been a certain type of person in power who we all know who that is and what that demographic is. And there has not been a sustained and real commitment to having individuals with lived experiences in any of these systems beyond panels. Having folks not just on an advisory board, but actually sitting at the decision-making tables for any reform efforts in a real and meaningful way. The ability to share her story, the ability to do this in a room like this is incredibly impactful and also incredibly challenging.
I need to piggyback for 1 second. So I can tell you this for sure, that the only reason I'm here today is because of Arthur Johnson, right? He was invited to speak to the Penn students. I was not, as a woman, right? But he, as being a man, that's why I'm here today. Just to tell you the biases that not only I face as a returning citizen, right? But the biases within the organizations that are leading this movement, right? And as a Latina, right? Because the world is so binary. So I'm really not included in a lot of things. So I would love to be included, right? But I have never been given that chance. And I'm not gonna beg nobody for that chance because my sisters are dying behind those walls, so I have to be boots on the ground, right? But she's right. And then what I've been dealing with is something I never thought about before I went to prison, right? Like sexism against women. I never thought about that shit before I went to prison. But when I came out and I was like, my God, like all the men are leading these organizations and you know, there's no women, and I don't want to lead no organization because I believe, you know, I don't want to be the leader. I want us all to be the leaders, you know, and make decisions like that. But that's when I started to realize that I'm being oppressed again because of my gender. You know, like I'm invited to things, but I'm never on the team. I'm never getting a paycheck like they are. You know, and it's because I believe I'm a woman. Sometimes I speak a little bit too, I'm too honest. But I just don't never, if I'm not honest, then I just rather not breathe. But with that being said, I think that you're right. There needs to be a space for me, and nobody has created that space. But I have a lot of hope, and I don't hope on that, but I believe that will happen. And I won't stop fighting for the women, even if that spot doesn't open. But maybe you can make some connections, sister. Get me on that spot. I love you.
You know, the only other thing I'll add is, in thinking about how you move forward and for all of you as future leaders who will hold a tremendous amount of power coming from this institution, That is what you need to take from this week. That is what you need to take from this work of how you do it in a different way than it has been done, because those changes haven't been impacted yet. And the last thing I'll add is when you think about reforms to the system, other countries, particularly in the child welfare and family court system, have done this far better than any place in the United States. And so thinking about the notion of prevention, the notion of how you support families, thinking about how much difference in eliminating poverty, the child tax credit, giving money to families that they used, shockingly, to take care of their children. And doing that in a more sustained and replicable way is the way to start to move some of these issues forward.
All right, I'll try and go back to the question. I hope I even can. It's hard. So one of the things that I think is going to happen with Dobbs being the law of the land, or the lack of protections, is going to be that there is a tremendous need for lawyers. So I'm scared for Pennsylvania. I don't think that Josh getting elected that Governor Shapiro getting elected is a cure-all at all. Okay, so what happens is there are and you know what, it's fine. Memes, like having solidarity with one another, laughing before we cry, social media, all of that's fine. Pink hats, I'm actually all for any of it. I think that we should try to make everything that we do have as much impact as possible, but I'm all for silliness too, and that's fine. So one of the silly things that I see is about how we joke that we'll drive you to go pick up your dry cleaning in another state, or whatever euphemism they used for it, and we'll get around this somehow. We're gonna have a really big problem in courts. Okay, we're gonna have a big problem getting lawyers that know what they're doing, that are willing to take pro bono time to York to do this work. I represent protesters in the city of Philadelphia. So if you're arrested as a protester, we'll represent you for free.
I was almost arrested. Damn.
Oh, I got you.
I might be arrested in month.
You call our hotline.
Okay.
But I get constant calls from people protesting in York County outside of an ICE detention center, and I can't do this by myself. And I don't know that there are going to be lawyers that mobilize throughout the state. I shouldn't have to drive to Pittsburgh. There's lawyers in Pittsburgh. They have law schools and everything. But I'm out there for protest cases as well. So I think that a big thing is going to be this jurisdictional challenge for attorneys, having to cross county and then also state lines, which we know we can't do without a waiver and license, by the way, in order to practice and to really up our game in pro bono representation. For a while at the Defender Association, there was one woman that was helping children get waivers to have abortions. One woman had to go to court all the time. And that was not her main job, by the way. She was a supervisor of a unit that did something totally different. And there was one person that if you were a child and you could figure out how to get to Barbara, and then Barbara could figure out how to get you in front of a judge fast enough to have a safe abortion, you could have it. I filled in for Barbara for one day when she was on vacation once, and I was entirely overwhelmed with having that many cases to get waivers in front of a judge for. And Barbara retired. I mean, don't even ask me who's doing it now. I don't know. And so there's going to be a desperate need for people to take on these cases. I know that a lot of people are really excited to do impact litigation surrounding this work. And they want to be the next person in the Supreme Court arguing against Dobbs. And that's great. But there's going to be a lot of women that are hurt in the meantime, a lot of people that are hurt in the meantime, and we need to get on the ball. I would also ask you to think about advocacy in these larger ways that we're talking about, right? We're not just here talking about the right to abortion. So we need to think about what we're willing to stand up against. What was it, 3 days ago? Well, I know. I had a weekend where my kid wanted a dump truck and I couldn't find the dump truck, so I'm like, I don't even know what day it is. Last Thursday, Judge Seisler in the Commonwealth Court decided that we closed down so many placements for juveniles. Now, we closed them down because juveniles were being beaten and raped in them. So it's not like, oh, we closed them down. You took away all our juvenile placements. We closed down a bunch of placements. So what are we doing with all the kids that are locked up now? Judge Seisler ordered last week that we're going to ship them to Pittsburgh and Texas. And they're not going to be able to. How many home passes do you think they're going to get? How many family members do you think are going to visit them? How long can they come back for a visit? Are they gonna put them on a flight? Or are they gonna say, maybe we'll wait another 60 days for your next home visit? And so we're not just taking kids away from parents, we're moving them so that they can't get near their parents. And that was last week, and we're all gonna stand for that? Because here's the thing, Judge Seisler didn't say they have to go to Texas, I don't like these kids, they have to go to Pittsburgh. She's not that kind of person, I happen to know her. But she's making this ruling out of what she thinks is necessity. So what are we gonna do about it to make that not necessary? What are we gonna do about it to make sure that the lawyers for the children can get to her next week and say, hey, I get why you did that, now you don't have to because we fixed it as a community. And so, do you think City Council's doing anything about it right now? Because you could contact them. So I think that we need to kind of broaden our scope of what we think is important for women, for children, for autonomy, and start thinking about it as autonomy and freedom, whether or not you plan on ever accessing abortion providers, which you might do before you even know it. I miscarried before I had the baby, and all my bills say abortion, because I didn't want to miscarry in court. I had a lot to do. And so my feeling was that if I could have a surgery done, I wouldn't have to continue my cases for clients who are in custody. So I asked them to please take it out before I get a stomach ache in court, before I have to use the restroom at the CJC to miscarry. And that's the charge. My insurance didn't cover it because I got an abortion outside of my tier provider. And so before you know it, you will have to access those things. You need to think about the ways that we think about autonomy, right? That was a miscarriage. It was my right to have that on a certain day. It was my right to not have to go through the embarrassment. I mean, then when I did have the baby, the water broke in court, so I was pretty embarrassed anyway. But to not have to go through that in the CJC. That was my right, and I almost couldn't access that. So we need to think about autonomy in a way larger sense than we do.
And think about how many women now don't have that option in terms of if they're going to miscarry and they know it.
Correct.
In many states. So I want to ask everybody, Marnie has given us a call to action. Cynthia, we'll come to you next. What can we do? What are things that law students or future advocates should be advocating for?
So first, Marnie, I want to say that whatever we have to do for that judge, if she's in Philly, let me know, because I will protest every freaking day. But so I think that realistically, of course, we're fighting a big monster, right? And we're dealing with a lot of different people. However, I can say right now that I know about 5 people who have PCRAs, right, under Scott Claudio, who I'm a little familiar with. And these cases are already appointed counsel. They all have dirty cops, right? So I think that the cases that realistically we could get the people out, we have to act. Because think about it like this, right? It's like, imagine all the people that we have in Pennsylvania, right, in prison, let's say the lifer population. If we could get those 5 lifers out, because we already have them in court, why not go for that? We could bring 5 daughters home, right, or 2 dads that were in there innocent and that are willing to even take a deal and say, I'm guilty, just to get out, right? So I think being realistic with the cases that we can get out, and then, picking up the cases that are decades old that I know very well, with forensic science, with, brain traumas, things of that nature that, the women didn't have the resources to get lawyers, so they were time barred. See, I went there and I seen that they were time barred, and I was like, what the hell is time barred? So I started to educate myself. I became a jailhouse lawyer. I never allowed myself to get time barred. Getting past the time bar is not easy, Marnie can tell you. You literally have to have newly discovered evidence, which they always want to say it's, you can't recant an affidavit, but you could accuse them. So it's a really hard thing to do. So preventing these people that have a shot are not time barred, right? So let's attack the cases that we can, bring these people home, and then keep fighting the cases, to get them untime barred with newly discovered evidence. And, that's where I come in. I do investigating. I do whatever I have to do to get the lawyers what they need and work with the lawyers to connect the families and things like that. It's a nonstop game. From morning to night, it's all I think about. I don't know if prison messed me up, but I can tell you that from the moment I wake up to the moment I go to sleep, I think about the people that are still suffering and how I'm free physically, but a part of me is like, I'm hurting inside because I know that they're standing for 3 counts. They're getting embarrassed as they strip for their visits. Their cells are being torn apart. Their legal mail is not getting to them. The system doesn't play fair, and these people are held in rural areas where they don't have no access to media. Phone calls are monitored.
They're lawyers.
Yeah. And one word on the phone, they'll clip your whole conversation. It's that easy. So I'm just saying, baby girl, there's so much we have to do. But I think being realistic and taking those 5 cases that we're talking with these beautiful students and then digging up some of the old cases and getting the women up, right? Come on, these women are dying. Not one woman has gotten out under Krasner. I don't understand that. The integrity unit was supposed to be a space created to look at cases, right? I submitted 20 submission forms that was created by Patricia Cummins before I left. And these submission forms that I filled out were brilliant. There was no way that they could have said no. There was enough in there for them to at least review it, give them a court date, and if you want to plead them out. But bring them home. Not one submission form has got, a response. So that just gives you an idea how the women are just falling in the cracks of the men. And it's not the men's fault that there's more male prisoners, but the women shouldn't be punished for that reality either.
Just for 10 seconds about how to do that. So, it's true. I love taking pro bono cases. By the way, I don't think you're messed up from I think doing this good work too makes you think about it all the time. And so that can be a positive that comes out of your trauma. But I love pro bono stuff. If I get a letter in the mail saying, will you take my PCRA, this is why I think I'm innocent, I can't physically do it. I don't have the hours in the day. But if someone comes to me and says, hey, I wrote up this Google sheet about all the different pieces of evidence. So I've gone through the evidence and I categorized it for you. And I think I can find someone, maybe a law student, to be your investigator. I'll take it. I'll do it. No, there are lawyers who want to do the work.
That's what I do. That's what I'm saying.
Well,
I'll make your whole job will be easier because here you have somebody, right? You have a woman that was sentenced to life without parole, right? Realistically, less than 1% of the world wins the habeas petition. We know that. I won it. But I'm not a lawyer, and even though I know law, right? I don't want to be a lawyer, but my point is, I can help you connect and do all the work. You have to do nothing. That's what I'm saying. That's what we have to do as a community. We have to do what we can because I know how busy lawyers are. Trust me, I'm not a lawyer and I'm super busy. But lawyers are so busy that I try to explain to my comrades, don't take it personal. Don't be emotional. They don't even respond to me. So I get it. And I salute y'all for all the work that y'all do. But you have me now, and I trust me, these cases, I'm not an idiot. These are slam dunk cases with forensic evidence that didn't even exist at that time. So how can you have a fair trial when they couldn't even determine how a fire started? So we're going to do the work. It takes a community to do it. We're working together here, all of us. I'm boots on the ground. Caroline is working, Arthur Johnson. We do everything. We'll knock on doors. So it's going to be a teamwork, and we're going to get it done together.
And then take those cases to your firms from your 3L to your first year at a firm. And I promise you that if you've worked it up, also that pro bono department will let you take that case with you. And you should see it all the way through. And then your copy machine's paid for and all your stuff, and you can, you don't have to write the letters yourself, you just write it, talk into some tape recorders and stuff like that. You also need to start doing pardons. My friend Josh got elected, maybe we still have a shot at some pardons in the next 4 years, and you need to pay attention to that.
And I have great candidates for the pardons that are really good friends of mine.
It's so much work.
This sounds like a Penn pro bono project.
It's basically a giving back to the women that are.
That's right.
Listen, I know all the women that could be pardoned, and Josh Shapiro, who's your friend. Well, he used to be an enemy, but he's been DMing me a lot. And I think he knows the power of my voice.
I think that's right.
Yeah, he's been DMing me, and I think I have my Fetterman on the last page, but we're still friends. But my point is that it's a community thing that we need to all sit together. I'll help Marnie, like, Marnie, this is all the stuff.
Right.
Marnie goes ham.
And then we have a whole legal team. So
We have a whole legal team. I told you it was going to be girls that was going to do it. And we have Ashley Biden on our corner. She's not here, but she's willing to help as well. So
So I have three things. One, you all remember when family separation at the border happened and everybody freaked out and everybody got really upset and lots of people sent millions and millions of dollars to wonderful immigrant legal services and child immigrant legal services, and lots of people went to the border, and everyone who had been doing family defense work and child advocacy work said, you realize we do this all the time at home. So I share that because part of this is educating yourself, right? And not only educating yourself within the walls of this fine institution, but getting outside into the court systems where the vast majority of Americans have justice either metered out or taken from them. And so really thinking about it, not in the theoretical concepts, but going out and seeing how people are treated when you go through the metal detectors, when you're told to dump your water, when you're told to get rid of your baby's formula, even though you're going to spend all day in family court because you were told to come at 9 o'clock, but your case isn't going to be heard till 3. And if you have snacks, you're going to have to leave them downstairs, even though you spent your last $5 to buy them. Understanding that that's the reality and educating yourself. And then my second, all of you are really good at bringing attention to stuff. So once you understand these systems, to use all of that social media knowledge to exert pressure, to bring this to officials' lights, to bring this to something that is not considered sort of the unknown system that nobody thinks about. And then my third is to not do that alone. Because contrary again to the 4 fine walls of this academic institution, lawyers don't solve everything. In fact, we're not doing a great job at solving a lot of things right now. So really thinking about who we need to work with. Yes. And making sure that anytime you are doing something to solve a policy issue or a legal issue, it is in partnership with someone who is not a lawyer. It could be a doctor, a nurse, an individual with lived experience, a mother, a father, an uncle, a cousin, a brother, a youth advocate, a parent advocate, but it is never on your own or only in a room of lawyers.
Can I say something real quick? Yeah. First, I want to salute you for being able to say that because a lot of people are egotistical, but thank you so much. I wanted to mention really quick before I forget that, not only do we have to focus on commutation, but compassionate release as well. Right now, we're working on Rose Dinkins' compassionate release, who is a political prisoner because, in the 70s, she couldn't get a job because she was Black. And that's the reality of why she's a political prisoner, because of the policies in play. Now, the compassionate release, right, of course, it has to be a letter drafted by a doctor, right, which we have covered. We have to say that her life expectancy is not going to be more than a certain amount of years, right? I hope to have her released in the avenue, because if not, she's going to die there. But another thing that I wanted to say, when you talk about, the returning citizens and, using us, right? I could tell you that about 3 years ago, Salim Holbrook, I guess the Abolitionist Law Center, attempted to, sue the Republicans to end prison gerrymandering, right? Yeah, however, when Cynthia Alvarado was a plaintiff, we won. So we sued Kerry Benninghoff, the Republican Party, to end prison gerrymandering. So that means that all the Philadelphia, the Allegheny County, and all the counties that we did win, you were part of that? Well, you were part of the victory.
Well, we brought a state court case, but ultimately they did in the policy. But we still have to fight at the federal level.
Okay.
That's only the maps have only changed for the state level.
So you're talking about the one with the public law interest?
It was the Legal Defense Fund, Abolitionist Law Center, and Valley Spark. We represented Saline.
Yeah, but we did it again, and we actually won. Yeah.
And then they passed it off.
We slam dunked that baby. The guys couldn't do it. I got it done.
But we have to.
They passed it off to the election lawyers.
Yeah.
And I will have you know that last Tuesday, we had a ballot drop box at CFCF and RCF, and because they're keeping men at RCF now. And then I forget, the women could take a bus and drop off all their stuff. And we even had one in court so that people that had their court dates on election day were still able to drop them off. And for next year, we're hoping to just have polls in the in the actual visitation room to have so that they can vote on real voting machines if they so choose. Although I'm getting kind of used to the mail.
But we need to, just so everybody knows, call to action, we still need to change the system on the federal side. So the LRC has, for this redistricting cycle, so this is every 10 years, as a result of advocacy, including going before the LRC and testifying over and over again, has changed the policy for this cycle. But we need to have the change in terms of prison-based gerrymandering at the federal level too.
So good. And really quick, I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with Maria from the organization FAM. Do you know who she is, Marnie? Okay, so you are in contact with her?
Yeah.
Good, because she's a friend of mine. I think that you guys need to be friends. But you're right. We have to keep fighting. And I think people like FAM, right, are organizations good to reach on a federal level because they have so many resources.
So I know we're at time.
We have time for the questions.
Okay, so we'll take 2 questions?
Yeah.
3 questions? Okay, we'll open it up.
We cleared it all up for them.
Questions? Yes.
So I want, and this is to anyone.
Can you speak up a little bit?
Yes. So this anyone can answer this on one system that we have that you guys haven't addressed that I was curious if you have any thoughts on is the child support system and especially child support debt, especially for non-custodial parents and how you've experienced that or how it interacts with the things that we've talked about.
Go for it.
I love that everybody's trying to name. I'm like, so here's what I'd say. I think it is another system that is profoundly understudied. It is another system that does not have lawyers, right? In addition to the custody proceedings where, again, we could talk about that and how women are treated in that and how criminal convictions or arrests are treated in the custody system. It is one that, the vast majority of litigants going through custody and support cases do not have lawyers, have to learn it themselves. And as far as the sort of support issues, the only thing, it's not an area that I have deep knowledge in, but the part I will point out is that what we have seen is it's being utilized by DHS as a weapon, actually, to say, if you're not engaged in this, then we're gonna keep your kid for a longer time. Again, which does not seem to be going towards what the goal is of we're trying to, quote, help a family, make everyone a better parent, make sure the family is safe and stable, but using that as sort of another policing mechanism to say, if you don't do this, if you don't meet this condition, then we're not gonna move forward.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
So I'm going to be speaking vicariously, right? Because obviously I'm not a man. I don't pay child support, and my kids were yanked away from me via our American system. But a lot of my male friends who do pay, child support, things like that. Let's say if they're working for like a week, right, and they're like, screw this job, I'm gonna go maybe sell drugs. I'm not making enough money because of the way our system is set up. Now what happens is they get a bench warrant, and they could go to jail. So now that same parent who was supposed to be supplying money, that pressure of not being able to pay that money, right, is the problem. We have a punitive system, America. We are conditioned to punish, right, from the moment that a child enters kindergarten to right now, right? It's just punishment, and it does not work. Mother Teresa said the best quote that when you persist, when you resist, things persist, right? So I think that we need to, as American society, we need to take so much chains off of people, right? And we need to say this and that. It's unfortunate you do have to pay this money, but you don't have the money right now. We'll figure something out because there is money. All the money that they're spending to house innocent people could be used for that. So I think it's like she said, over-policing, but it's our system. We don't have an egalitarian system like Germany. We push people away, right? We're closing every door, locking everybody up. Look, I posted something on the gram and somebody made a comment. They was like, I don't even want to go outside in Philadelphia because they're so scared about getting locked up. And I was like, God, that's how people are living. But I think that changing our society so we're more egalitarian, right, is the way to go and be more inclusive.
We have time for another question? Yes.
Could you explain to people what's time bar and how it got that way? You said a lot of women can't get out because they're time bar.
Oh, okay. So my good friend and partner here, Chedawil, time bar, apparently there was people on death row, right? And they were being housed there for years. And on like probably like the 20th year, they would put in another appeal, right? So the courts, the federal courts, were like, you know what? We're gonna stop this, you guys appealing, even though you may die innocent. And they created something that is called time bar, right? Meaning that if you don't put your appeal in within 30 days because you're not a lawyer, you lose your appeal rights. And it doesn't matter what you have, you need newly discovered evidence that will meet the Brady grounds, right? Which is very hard. And then you would, because the affidavits of a person that accuses you in 1990 and then recants, they don't want that. They only want the accusation but not the recantation. So getting time bar is very serious because you lose your appeal rights, and innocent trumps everything. So now I have two of my comrades, like Tyree Wallace, who's time barred, right? He's innocent. He has new evidence that he's innocent, but because of that procedure, right, he's unable to present anything until he overturns the time bar with new evidence that they're not letting him use because he's time barred. So I think what Arthur Johnson is trying to say is that we all leave here today with the time bar issue and how innocence trumps any procedure, right? Because that was a procedure that was put into place, I'm sure, by the bourgeoisie, maybe some rich white man, or though, to stop the shenanigans and to perpetuate mass incarceration. So time bar is very serious, and that's what we're hoping that Yelena and Rosalie and the people we have in court do not get time barred. This is how we fight on every angle, right? But still, we want to fight to remove that time bar issue, which is extremely important. And it's predominantly black and brown people because they don't know the law. They get sentenced to life, they're devastated. They don't even know how to read the books. They have 30 days to figure out an appeal. So that's an unfair game, and we need to level the playing field. Thank you for such a great question.
And that's something that you can fight for. I mean, it's a legislative thing. She's absolutely right. They just did it to try to control the courts because it seemed like a little overwhelming. And if we were to prioritize innocence, absolutely, over procedure, especially in regards to wrongful convictions, then we could do it. And there's a million different ways that we could do it. But we need to fight for that very much, for the law to be just.
So you come out with a plan and we're there. All your little soldiers, we all board.
By the answer.
Can we have a round of applause for Thank you, everyone.
Good one.
And it's my job.